I would love it if we could find something that's like a fire extinguisher or an asbestos blanket so that when I see somebody took a thing wrong, I can just hide under this and whisper, I'm sorry.
I would just push, why didn't you respond the way I wanted you to? Why didn't you say that? Why aren't you emotionally more available? Why did you leave when we were having a heated conversation? Scott's covering.
Why?
If one partner determines the playing field and the rules around it, right, it's not fair anymore, and it's not safe anymore.
Help people come to recognition of how these traits, these things that we're born with. You can practice that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Neurodivergent Connections. This is a channel where three different neurotypes compare notes on what it means to be in a neurodiverse world and neurodiverse relationships. And let me introduce the three of us. First, we have Mona Kay, who is a PhD in social worker and host of the Neurodiverse Love podcast. And then we have the amazing Scott Simpson, who identifies as an ADHDer. And by the way, Mona Kay identifies as a late identified ADHDer. I am Greg Fuqua, a mental health counselor in the state of Iowa. I do counseling and coaching with a focus on neurodiverse couples and neurodivergent individuals. And we have an interesting topic submitted by one of Mona's listeners. And we're going to sort of give our thoughts on and perspectives on it. Mona, do you want to start with
Sure.
giving us some of that feedback from one of your listeners?
Yeah, and I thank the person that contacted me with this subject because it comes up a lot in the support groups that I facilitate for non-autistic partners, and it comes up a lot in the couples groups that I facilitate too. So it's about repair. And oftentimes there are words that we can say to our partner. There are things that we can do very differently. We have a different perspective. One of us might be more black and white or rational and logical, and the other is looking for emotional reciprocity and specific words or a tone or whatever. And it causes so many challenges. And the biggest challenge is that we oftentimes don't seem to be able to repair. And we keep having the same patterns over and over again in our communication that turn into arguments or fights or judgment. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what our own experiences are related to this. And then I have some books that I'm going to recommend to folks, and they're not specifically written for neurodiverse couples, but I think that you can look at what others have found has been successful and see what might work for you. So I think one of the things that the questioner was really trying to look for some guidance on was when you're maybe in an emotional state or you're trying to share something with your partner and they don't understand maybe how to respond. So I'll give you an example. Your dog dies and your partner says, well, we can get another dog. And that's not what you were looking for. And you feel like your partner doesn't understand you. Your partner doesn't get the connection you had with your dog. Your partner is being rude. Your partner isn't considering your emotions, your feelings, whatever. And it turns into a fight. And those are words that your partner did not intend to use to hurt you or to show you that they don't love you or they don't care. And you're looking for some kind of repair now that you feel hurt. And your partner is clueless. They don't understand because they said what maybe they would want to hear if they had lost their dog, right? And so the question is, number one, how can you put yourself in your partner's shoes first and begin to understand their perspective? Because your brains are so wired differently, right? And then how do you not take what they said personally, which was a big issue for me, and feel hurt by it, but instead get curious? Because the repair part is really important. But I think the understanding through curiosity is also critically important, especially with neurodiverse couples. Because if you don't understand, which I didn't, that your partner is very logical and rational and isn't going to follow your emotions with something equally emotionally supportive, you're going to continue to get hurt. And they may not understand why you need an apology or why you are feeling hurt. And then that exacerbates it more.
Oh
So
my
I'd love,
God, yes.
right? So I'd love to hear. I mean, I can go on and on and on because this happened throughout my 30-year marriage, but I would love to hear your thoughts, both of you. And, as we go through this conversation, we'll talk about some ways in which repair can happen. But what has been your lived experience on this?
I'll say that you've described the opening stages of things going really, really badly. Because I'm used to them going past this. I'm used to there not being a curiosity. If there is curiosity, it comes possibly weeks later when somebody's like, "Why haven't we been talking for 3 weeks?"
Mhm.
I'm curious what happened, and I've the whole time been going, I think I've figured out what happened, as Greg always reminds us in every episode, I think, because it's so valuable, that our minds fill in the blanks
Yeah.
with stuff that hurts to think about. You didn't use those words, but you fill in the unknown variables with negative things. We tend to. And so I think I figured it out. And even if I know what she needs, even if I've figured out, okay, what she needed was emotional support, what do I do now? What I said has already been, like, the bomb's already gone off.
Right.
I don't know how to repair there. I don't know how to go back and say, because we've all had so many occasions where we think they're curious and that explaining ourselves and what our thoughts were will somehow make things better, that more information and more communication will sort this out. But then, because of where they're at, it
Mhm.
sounds like excuses. It sounds
Mhm.
like sucking up. It sounds like everything bad. And so I've not had this repair experience. I don't have a track record of coming back after the bomb goes off and putting things back together. And
Ever,
so there are craters all over the place.
uh,
There's
ever you
walls.
you don't have an example of repair? Because I'm going to give you after Greg. I have some, but do you have any examples of repair,
I
Scott?
mean, I do, but well after the fact, like long after they should have happened in my mind.
Okay.
But that's just me. Like
Okay.
I would love to learn if I can figure out a strategy today with you two. I would love it if we could find something that's like a fire extinguisher or an asbestos blanket, so that when I see somebody took a thing wrong, I can just hide under this and whisper, "I'm sorry," or something that will it like the bomb's gone off or might be still ticking, but we can pull back from this. And this is what
Okay.
I keep saying in my relationship that I want. I'm
Okay.
going to keep saying things that set you off.
Right.
Okay, I can't change your wiring. You can't change my wiring. By our natures, we're going to have issues. I just want them not to be fatal. I just
Mm,
want them to be, if it's more like spilled milk than a dirty bomb, and then we
uh,
can live through that. Then we can do repairs. But now it's to the level where, like, it feels like every time there's one of these big blowups over a little miscommunication, that we have to tear it down to the foundation and start hammering in new I don't, my metaphors go off the rail
well,
when there's carpentry involved.
you said, Scott, I mean, we're laughing at this. We're laughing at what you're sharing or what you're saying, but it's so
Yes.
friggin' serious. I
Well,
can
it
tell
is.
you.
It's just how I'm saying it.
Right, right, right. I
I'm
love
flippant about my own trauma.
I know, and sometimes I am too. But you said something before we started recording that I thought was so important, and you said repair as maintenance instead of renovation. And I think that that is critical because, and I'm going to use another analogy, your car, right? You're driving your car around with like barely any gas. The engine's going to blow up, right? So the repair and the understanding of what each of you needs to repair is going to be critical to keep that tank, that relationship tank, at least close to full, or at least not empty all the time, right?
That's
So
right.
Greg, yeah. So Greg, what do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have a harder time talking about, and well, let me back up. So I am late identified autistic, so I'm gonna have a certain perspective on this that might be difficult to hear in some ways, which is, and I think Scott speaks this, which is, who is right and who
Mhm.
is wrong? So if I'm not tracking the emotions and you get hurt by that, and now I have created the rules around the game, which is emotional content and context that I have deficits around, guess what? You're right. You are going to get hurt because I don't match well with that, right? And
Mhm.
I am tracking the facts, I'm tracking the logistics.
Mhm.
So I think part of, before we even get to the repair, there's a bunch of things that has to happen. And number one, we have to recognize that we do have different languages and different ways of processing, and we have to be aware of the differences between emotional content and factual content.
Mhm.
And autistics don't track the emotional content sometimes, or if they do, it's too intense.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's say there's been a blow up around emotional misattunement, right? And
Mhm.
now my partner is like, you don't get it. You don't get me. You're not validating my emotions. And all that emotion's coming at me. What's going to happen to that person? Are they going to now meet you emotionally?
No.
They're going to run away. It's become even more intense.
Mhm.
So part of this is having to back up and say, no, now hold on. We've got to rework our assumptions about what is normal in terms of how we process, think, and feel. Okay. And if we haven't started there yet, and there's this like bean counting, this owing of somebody over this emotional period of time where they've had not got their needs met, right? And I'm right and you're wrong. I'm right and you're wrong. This is the whole problem. Okay. Is there safety to be able to make these bridges, right? Um, and and does somebody have to think and feel like you? And it goes back to that again. And I would say no. And so how do we get to this point? Number one is that we need to recognize that we have different ways of
Mhm.
processing and understanding the context of things that are happening. So we've got to rework our assumptions about that. And again, this goes to neurodiverse education, psychoeducation, right? But what it requires, I think, for both partners is this idea of explicit language that asks for your needs and that recognize what your needs are.
Mhm.
Because if it's not explicit, you guys are going to miss each other again. Because one's on the emotional track, one's on the factual logistical track. All right, that's going to happen over and over again. So an example might be that the neurotypical partner says, our dog died and I am really hurting and I feel like I need some emotional support from you. And that means I want to be closer to you. I want you to understand my feelings and be able, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but essentially what you're doing is you're saying this person needs to understand this explicitly and in terms of facts.
Mhm. Yes.
And I have to explain that to them so they have a chance of meeting me there
Mhm.
and I can get my needs met too, right? And so you literally have to say, this is what it looks like for me to be emotionally cared for and supported here. And it doesn't mean that that person can do that exactly the way you want it to either, right? So,
Yes.
That's true
Yes.
too. That's true too. You have to know whether what you're asking for is something they have capacity for.
Right.
Yeah, it could
yeah,
even be that day. Like maybe you had the worst day ever, and somebody comes and says, "My dog died." It's like I'm already distracted by the worst day I ever had.
Right.
I'm not tuned in enough to know what you needed. But can I do a quick translation of the story you just told so I can tell Holistic people what I would hear if that happened?
Yeah.
I would hear my partner say, so I got up today and I found out that the dog was sick. I took the dog to the vet. The vet put the dog down. I don't know what to do with the dog now. And I don't know how I'm going to get to work tomorrow if I have to take care of the dog. I
Oh,
would then step up and say something about how to make those things that she's having a hard time have
Yep.
happen.
Yes.
If she had instead said what Greg said, I would have been listening all about her feelings, not about the practical stuff. Not with the dog,
right,
but
right.
I'm just coming off of one of these blow ups. I'm not going to get into anything that's going to make it breach any
Yeah,
confidences,
yeah.
but somebody in my life was having an issue with somebody else in their life, and the conversation sounded to me like a list of facts that had been established and the
Mhm.
people she had talked to today about the facts, and it suddenly wrapped up, and we had just shot our show, and I was like, I'm going to listen for the emotional stuff. I'm going to look for emotional cues. Is she
Uh-huh.
upset? Does she need something? No, because what I heard, even though I was listening for the emotions, was facts. I said something factual back, and
Yeah.
and
So
and so I'm right on board with both of you, is what I'm saying.
this is so critically important. Greg, I don't know if you had more to say. I want to follow up with what you and Scott were talking about, so I don't want to cut you off. So feel free to
No,
keep.
I always have more to say, Mona.
Go, 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 because I think you were on a really important role that I think is going to be helpful to both partners. I think they need to hear this.
Yeah, and so I think what happens from the person who has those emotional needs that and when they don't get taken care of is that there is I don't know how to explain this. I guess it's not emotional hostage taking, but it's some sort of bargaining chip about emotions, and about how my emotions aren't getting met and that makes you wrong, right? Um, I think, for my couples, so I'll give you an example of one of my couples. I am working on a communication exercise with them, right? And I'm letting the ADHD partner, there's an ADHD partner and an autistic partner, the ADHD partner kind of go, and I'm making sure to sort of keep them aware of how long they're talking and and then and then I go to the autistic partner when she makes a reflective statement of what she heard. I say, what are you picking up in terms of what does that mean emotionally for him?
Mm.
And she starts crying. And as I am actually modeling it back to her. Okay, so I'm saying this is what I'm picking up. This is what I'm going to talk about. This is what I'm going to affirm, and she just starts crying. And so, can you tell me that that the autistic person doesn't have emotions?
No.
No, it's not about that. And I said to her, what's going on with you? And she said, I recognize I'm not good at this, and I
Mm.
don't know if I can do this.
Mm.
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 And she could, but it took a lot of safety, a lot of acknowledgement of, yeah, this is hard. This isn't just a simple thing, right?
Mm.
And
Mm.
when she, made those reflective statements, they were pretty simplified, I would say, right? So I'm used to giving like this depth of empathy, which kind of adds on to what the other person is saying to make them feel even more heard.
Mhm.
She got very simple. He is happy because he is sad because, right?
Mhm.
That's about as far as it went. And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yay,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I'm like, and so I think this kind of explains that we're not on an even playing field.
Mhm.
And if one partner determines the playing field and the rules around it, right, it's not fair anymore
Right.
and it's not safe anymore. And I think that's kind of my main point. Obviously, I've got more stuff we can talk about, and I think it involves the explicit communication and also things we've talked about earlier, which is preparation and debriefing. Meaning, we have to get ahead of this stuff. We've got to work on it beforehand. I don't want to have to do repair. That's
Yeah,
my take.
yeah. Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I wish I had known these things in my marriage, but I have learned them after my marriage. And I have used some of these tools and skills and ways of communicating differently in all the other relationships that I've had, including friendships with people who are a different neurotype than I am. So, one thing you said, Greg, that I think is really critically important is the safety issue. So if you do not feel emotionally safe to ask for what you want from your partner, right? And you have trauma in your background from your family of origin, from previous relationships, where when you shared what you needed, you were told that you were too emotional or, you're stupid or what the heck, what are you talking about? Because the
Grow
person,
up.
whatever, right? Um, then it's hard. And if you haven't built that emotional safety in your current relationship, it's really hard for you, or it may be really hard for you to ask for what you need and think that you deserve it or that you can get it, right? So I think having that therapist or that coach who understands all of this, who can help translate and help you get to a point where you can feel safe with each other in asking for what you need, I think is critically important. Because, and I've said this on my podcast before, when I was hurt by something my ex-husband said, or I was feeling hurt by something that went on in my life, I started asking him for a hug because I knew the words that would come out of his mouth, not because he didn't want to, not because he didn't want to comfort me or he didn't want me to feel better, but he had words come out of his mouth that just got me more pissed, right? Which is what, this original conversation was all about. He didn't want to tip me off. So I realized that if I was going to get that kind of co-regulating with him and feel safe, I had to ask for the hug. Okay. That really helped me. However, it wasn't enough. And I'm
No.
using my hands, the
Mhm.
ADHD in me, right? It wasn't enough. So one of the things that he did, and I really have to thank him for this, is he would go to the store and he would get a card. Instead of coming up with the words to apologize to me, because he wasn't getting it right in my mind, because I had these high expectations of him having a brain like me, which isn't better or worse. It just, I was looking for Mona's response rather than his response. He would get these unbelievably beautiful cards that said amazing things. And I wanted him to say the words to me. But he did, it was like a proxy, right? And I have every single one of those cards that he ever gave to me. Every single one over 32 years because they meant the world to me. And now I understand that was his way of connecting emotionally when he couldn't find the words. So I want everybody to hear this. You may not get the words you need from your partner, but there may be other things they're doing. They may be doing acts of service. They may be, getting the gas tank filled in your car. They may be making dinner for you after you've said you were hurt. They may not respond in the way you need, but you have to be explicit and tell them. But you can't feel safe if for however many years you've been negated for having those needs because they're not needs your partner has. Right? Stop.
Um, Something following up on what you have both just said. We talk about safe, and you
Yeah.
talk about translation, and I've run into those two colliding. Last time I talked to my therapist, and I was talking about relationship stuff. I kept coming back to safety. It needs to be safe because when
Mhm.
I hear Greg say it, I know exactly what he means.
Yeah.
But my therapist asked me to define it, and I pride myself on my ability to define words and be nuanced about it.
Okay.
I was stuck. I could not explain it. It's just like, well, safe is safe. Safety brings safe feelings. Do you guys have a good way of explaining this to people who don't understand it? Because I feel it. I feel when Greg talks about how much we need safety and to be seen, heard, understood, appreciated, all that stuff. But safe,
Mhm.
I can't quite box it in a way that I'm confident other people will get. Do you guys have a view on that?
Yeah, Greg.
Well,
I,
again, if my emotions aren't getting met and I ratchet up my emotions in order to get my emotions met, and I can't meet you on that same playing field equally, it isn't safe.
yeah.
Okay. So number one is that, so part of safety is also being able to regulate yourself first.
Mhm.
If I don't regulate myself first and I get to put my emotions and my agenda on you, right? It is not going to be safe. Why? Because I am pushed down, I'm belittled, I am diminished, I am not affirmed in that back and forth, right? Secondly, safety is that ability to understand yourself and then also move toward your partner back and forth. It isn't just staying with you and your agenda. And so this is something I coach a lot of my autistics on. I'm like, don't just stay here. Don't just keep going here with yourself. Okay. Move back to them. Okay. Then move back to yourself. And then move back to them and move back to yourself. And that shifting back and forth is something that autistics struggle with because we are internalized and we are self-regulators and we are monotropic, meaning that we get in our own heads with our own dialogues, and everything else blacks out around us, right? And this speaks to the idea of mentalization, theory of mind, not being able to be attuned to what's going on for other people. And so I say, no, we've got to pause and shift into a more external orientation, interior orientation, external orientation, back and forth. And we have to practice that. That will also help create safety. Also, for both partners need to do that too. Again, if my agenda rules the day, and I don't think about you, as Mona says, with the right curiosity, with the right openness, the possibility that you do have good intentions, but this might be hard for you, right? I think those two things are ways of defining safety. Maybe does that make sense,
If
Scott?
if I'm asking my partner for safety or to help cultivate safety, and
Mhm.
they don't, and all I have to explain is that, well, I know when I feel safe and I know when I feel it's dangerous, and I can tell you what safety's not. If
Okay.
somebody came, if a neurotypical partner came to me with that, that would frustrate me because that's still too vague. I need to
Okay.
know what I need to know what I need to do. I need to know how I'm going to know it's working,
Okay.
etc. And so how I can say, when somebody's doing something that doesn't make me feel safe, or I can say when something does make me feel safe, but I'd love to give something in advance that says, here's what safety looks like in a way that you can grasp. This is what I'm
Okay.
after, and here's what I can ask you to do. Managing my own emotions and being responsible in interacting with people, that's great. Greg, what you just said about making, like, being deliberate instead of passive about going toward the partner, I see that because
Yeah.
my autistic experience is that whatever is important in my head right now is what is important, and other
Yep.
people's important really isn't. You can try, but
Yeah. And I
It's not
think
that.
that creates a lot of conflict.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
creates a lot of
I
conflict.
see.
And
I
yeah.
see the
So,
value in making a point of bringing yourself back to the partner. I'd never heard that
yeah.
before. I like that.
Yeah. I love, Greg, the internalized, externalized. And maybe that's even, those are terms that neurodiverse couples can incorporate into their conversation, right? I'm being internal right now, and you're being external. Let's
Mm,
pause. Maybe it's time for a pause when we're being too internal or too external. And let's take some time away from each other to get re-regulated, to
mm,
have a behavior change to calm our nervous system so that we can come back to each other and understand the other's response and the response they need. So I like the internal, external. I'm going to use that in
mm,
coaching and support groups. And how I would describe safety is everything Greg said. And then I would add that when I am becoming overstimulated, I am no longer safe for my partner.
mm,
Period. For me, this is for me. And when my partner is becoming overstimulated or dysregulated, you can use either word, they are no longer emotionally safe for me. And I'll give you an example with one of the men I dated after my divorce. He would scream. He would scream when he got dysregulated. And I knew I wasn't emotionally safe when he was in that state. So I had to set a boundary, and I had to say to him, I had to maintain my safety. I understand you're, feeling angry or you're emotional at this time. I am going to step away from the conversation, and I told him I was going to leave and go to TJ Maxx. He said, please don't leave the house. I said, I'm going to go into the bedroom. I'm gonna lock the door, and when you are calm and can have a conversation, please knock on the door, text me. That brought me emotional safety. But I had to set the boundary when I saw him getting overstimulated. And I at that time also had to learn to do that with myself. I had to set a boundary for myself to not continue a conversation when I knew I was overstimulated. Does that make sense?
That
Yeah.
was
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Did you learn any trick for when you are like at that
Yes.
overstimulation threshold to not request that time by saying fuck off and hanging up on them? Like, how did you learn to do
Oh,
that?
I did that fuck off, not hanging up, screaming for 3 hours during my entire marriage. So I was
Yeah.
determined not to repeat that.
Well,
In
how do you cross that barrier? Because, like, I mean,
you
yeah,
self-awareness,
I get that
self-awareness, Scott,
when
self-awareness. You
I
have to monitor yourself, and it is the hardest thing to do. It is one of the hardest things to do. But if you value your relationship with yourself and your
Mhm.
partner, because I think it starts with self. If I am constantly dysregulated every time I have a conversation with my partner who I love, how is that a healthy relationship? I
No,
remember,
you might feel justified in being so turned up, but you're not going
oh,
to get anywhere.
right. And I remember my ex saying to me, I don't know if it was during our separation or after we divorced, that he felt our relationship was like a cancer. And he was so right. And a cancer does not heal from continuing to give more food to the or whatever the cancer cells need. You gotta stop the spread. So, we're talking all these analogies. Uh, you your self-awareness, even if you have alexithymia, I think
That's what I was thinking next. Yeah.
it's going to be the game changer.
No,
I think
I know that many of us, and Greg, I can see the wheels spinning in your head.
he's writing things down. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
mean, we're the type of people who don't know we're yelling when we're yelling. That people have to tell us that we're yelling, or that why are you so upset? So to know when you are at that or near that breaking point where your emotions are no longer in touch with your logic, um, I mean, I guess that's a place where you, as a couple, you might develop a code word
Yes.
that that non-stigmatizingly says you're reaching the distortion threshold and it's time to
Right.
turn it down.
You're at a 10.
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's take a pause. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is where I think some rehearsal and the practicing of scripts can help. It can be sometimes hard to pull these out in the moment, but one of the scripts I give for couples, and this both sides can use this, is that I can tell this is really important. Is I think a very neutral statement that's almost always accurate, because once you guys are getting elevated, okay, and you start validating them without judging them,
Mm.
right? I can tell this is really important, and so we need to do this right. And going off of that script, and also saying, let's come back to this later today, or I want to come back to this at a certain point. And the person who decides this is too much, and I'm putting, creating a break, okay, is the one that has to, come back or determine that time, and you do that by checking in with the other partner. Hey, how are you feeling? Are you ready to maybe talk about what was hard earlier, or what was really important for us earlier, and again, so you're creating some safety there, right?
Mhm.
One thing to watch out for, particularly for the more quote unquote neurotypical partner, is describing the other person's experience, intentions, and feelings and thinking. Do not do that. Okay. Autistics have hard enough times understanding themselves and their own identity and their own motivations to have somebody with the authority to say, you're doing this, and this is what you're doing, and this is how you're thinking, and you're doing it because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, now we're going down a huge rabbit hole that we have to now rework and maybe argue about. No, that isn't my intentions. Or maybe I don't know what my intentions are, but now I'm really lost because you seem to have the authority on what is right and I am wrong. Right? So that's a good example of unsafety. And I deal with this with my couples all the time, where the neurotypical becomes the therapist or the authority or the parental figure for the other person. They're saying, this is what you're doing, and this is wrong, and this is what you need to do, right? Again, I don't think that's safe.
I did
I
it all the time in my marriage. Yeah.
That kills me. That is
And-
all, Greg. That is almost always the root of what is the most painful stuff to me.
Yes.
That is, if you were
Yep.
to explain rejection sensitive
Yes.
dysphoria, if that's a thing,
Yep.
that what you described is the thing that sends me there.
Yeah, I see this as a real trouble point. And I have to say, okay, stop doing that and turn those into questions, turn those into kind questions,
Yeah.
You can
Curiosity.
also point yourself and say, I'm interpreting it this way, is that accurate in terms of what you're intending? And so again, we're creating safety. We're not overmeshing and meshing, we're not overlapping.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I would say about self-regulation is I kind of have a three-part method of, and again, this is easier said than done stuff, as everything is in therapy, is number one, know your triggers
Yes.
and know your core values, because your triggers are your core values being undermined all the time. And your core values, if you're an autistic, is probably connected at some level to the drive for autonomy, which overlaps with demand avoidance. So pressure and me determining what's right for you and you having to do it this way. And this is the way you need to apologize, by the way. And right. And this is what, actually creates a lot of resistance. And so I often try to give to try to rework that and try to give the autistic person more space in the dialogue and say, what do you need to hear? What would it sound like for you? What would be safe for you? So number one, know your triggers. Okay, so I'm getting off track. Know your triggers, and a lot of times your triggers, if you want to think of it in a less deficit-oriented way, in a more positive needs way, then think about it in terms of your core values, because that aligns always with me. And then know the feeling of what it means to be triggered. Okay, because you're going to get a shot of something, and I call these parts. So parts move in and they take over, tend to be protective parts, managerial parts, firefighter parts, these parts that react, these parts that come over and take over. Right now, we lose ourselves in these emotions, these strong parts and emotions. Know the feeling of that, know the connection between the trigger and the sensation to your body. Okay, that sensation should become your warning bell, your siren to stop. Okay, to stop. And this is where you actually have to go internally. Okay, and you have to acknowledge with compassion what's hard for you in that moment and acknowledge what's happening for you. And again, in a positive way, it'd be great. If it's in a blame way, not so good, right? So those are sort of the three steps that I would want people to use to create more. And sometimes that's meant for me. I no longer can focus on the other person's words and what they're saying to me. I am going, oh my God, I'm really triggered, and I'm taking care of myself. Again, I'm trying to create safety as the priority in the interaction first. And sometimes that means I'm not going to catch everything. But if I'm calm and I'm accepting and I'm taking care of myself, it's going to be more safe, right?
Yeah, 100% agree, Greg. And that's the reason that I say that self-awareness and that self-soothing or self-regulation has
Yeah.
been a game changer for me.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
wish I had that at 21 when I got into my relationship with my ex-husband. And even my daughter has said to me, Mom, you've changed. And I'm like, yeah, because I figured out this. And so I would say getting to like the next phase of repair, if you can't get yourself regulated or re-regulated, then I don't know how you could see what happened through a compassionate, kind lens and even want to apologize, period. And I remember during my marriage, my ex-husband would logicalize, and I think I've used this here, but I've used it on the podcast. He would logicalize my emotions. And he would, Greg, you said the neurotypical telling the autistic partner what they should be doing and what they're thinking and all that. He would do that to me. And I understand that logicalizing my emotions allowed him maybe to have some safety, but also to understand emotions he'd never probably felt or didn't understand or whatever. So I also think it's important to have that conversation about why, if your partner is logicalizing your emotions, and I know it's not a real word, but it just makes so much sense.
Yep.
It's probably because they're trying to understand. They're getting curious, but it feels like an offense. And it put me on the defensive over and over and over again. But what everybody who's listening has the benefit of, if you understand you're a neurodiverse couple, is that you're looking for either a response or repair that you need, and your partner may or may not be able to give it to you. But if you have the conversation about what a compassionate, kind response looks like in their head, then and that's not when you're, dysregulated, but you have the conversation about what an apology or repair would look like, what you each need. Then when you get into those dysregulated conversations, you can pause. You can, like Greg said, you can understand what is triggering you, what core values are being possibly threatened or triggered, that your partner's not understanding why this is so important to you. And then to be able to calm down and to re-regulate yourself. If you understand what you each need when you get triggered and when you feel dysregulated and when you feel offended, I really think that oftentimes I feel offended because you did not get me. You didn't get my emotional needs. You didn't say the right thing, that you can pause and do things differently. However, we all need different kinds of repair, right? So for me, and I'm gonna share some books because these are books I've shared in my support groups that have been really helpful to me and might be helpful to some of you. So the first one just came out, I want to say a year and a half ago, and I know it's going to be backwards or whatever, but it's Fight Right by Julie and John Gottman. They've been doing research for 50 plus years with all kinds of couples, not specifically neurodiverse couples, but I guarantee you, because every time I read their books, I'm like, oh, that's a neurodiverse couple. That's a neurodiverse couple.
That's funny when you can spot things like
Oh,
that.
I
It's like no,
spotted, yeah,
nobody involved
a
saw it, but
hundred
you're
times.
like, oh, I get what's really going on here. It's a shame they didn't, but
Exactly. But that's a great book. This is by Harriet Lerner. She's written some fantastic books. This one is called Why Won't You Apologize? Healing Big Betrayals and Everyday Hurts. Another great, great book. The Five Apology Languages. You can see I've read all these by Gary Chapman, who wrote The Five Love Languages. I know sometimes people talk about it's a little bit of a religious bent, but it's very interesting. And there's an actual tool in there where you can see what your apology language is. And then Getting to Zero by Jason Gaddis. All great books that I highly recommend. None of them are too expensive, but we're not going to go into all the details of how you repair. But I think understanding what you each need. Now, some folks, if you say, I'm sorry, it's done. You can move on, right? I'm sorry. And you don't even need to follow, I'm sorry with, I'm sorry for this specific thing. Other people need, I'm sorry for, and then specifically stating what you think you did wrong. This is how I'm going to change in the future, like changed behavior, and telling your partner what you're specifically going to do, and then actually changing the behavior or the way you communicate in the future so that your partner can see that they can trust your word, that you're trustworthy, is also very critical for a lot of people. So, and then there's sometimes a few other steps that people need or a few other things that people need. Understanding that I'm sorry was never enough for me and that I needed to see consistent changed behavior was really critically important for me to communicate in my relationships after my divorce. My ex thought, I'm sorry was enough. Let's move on. It was never enough for me. Never. So, what do you guys think?
I'm feeling like arguing with you all of a sudden.
Go for it.
And I'm going to admit that. What do you mean? What do you mean you need more than sorry? I didn't do anything
Oh,
wrong. I thought the whole point of this was that I was misunderstood and that just we just weren't understanding each other. Why do I need to say sorry for anything? I didn't do anything wrong. I was being honest and transparent and real and vulnerable and trying to do my best. And you mean more than sorry? Why am I even saying sorry? Like, I
Thank
know that these are all good things, and I don't mean to question any of the books or advice, but just as the autistic guy, that's where my head goes.
I hear you. And this is the biggest challenge in neurodiverse relationships because if your brain is wired very differently from your partner and you don't think you did anything wrong,
Hmm.
then why should you apologize?
Yep.
Well,
Absolutely,
yeah.
Scott.
Well, like I
So,
mean, it just feels like, and I don't assume it is because I know I get things wrong sometimes, but it feels like it's all these like how to get your man to apologize to you on his knees, how to get your man to apologize and change who he is. You're bored, punish him. Like what, these I don't know. I don't. It just feels a
okay.
little oogie for me. If the whole point is we just need to understand our own triggers and each other's needs. Like, okay, you feel like you need an apology, but for what?
For 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 hurting me. You didn't intend to hurt me, but I felt hurt. So here's the challenge.
I'm.
Okay,
This is where I'm
so
behind, I think.
I think this is such an important discussion because I
Okay.
think this is where the original email, the questioner
Yeah, we're back to
was
that.
coming from. Okay. So you don't feel you hurt me, but I feel hurt.
Well,
So
I believe that you're hurt, but your reason for being hurt is something that I didn't intend. So I'm having a hard time going why that's my fault.
right.
Like
So
I did a neutral thing. You're hurt by it. Why do I have to apologize?
okay. So here's my feeling, and then I would love to hear Greg's thoughts.
Yes, please.
If you are in a relationship with somebody you love and they are telling you they are hurt by something you said or did, and I think it's going to go both ways, right? I think hearing that and saying, what can I do differently? And if you are capable of doing it differently in the future, maybe I'm sorry isn't the right 2 words to say, or I am sorry, 3 words, right? And that's why I needed the change in behavior or the change in communication, but you may never get it because
Mm.
it doesn't make sense to your partner. And this is where I think sometimes, and I posted this on Instagram, I don't know, a few weeks ago, sometimes we're just not compatible anymore. Okay. And that incompatibility in multiple areas can mean you are not going to have a healthy relationship moving forward. That is, I think, one of the hardest things for a lot of people to accept. I can love my partner. I loved my husband the day we divorced. It didn't matter. We were no longer compatible. We couldn't hear each other in a compassionate, kind way. We couldn't connect. We couldn't co regulate. We couldn't even self regulate, right? So, what you're saying makes so much sense, Scott. If you repeatedly feel like you're being forced to apologize for something you're not sorry for, how is that a safe relationship? But if
Oh,
you,
okay.
right, if you understand, I'm so glad you asked that. If you
But I'm just
understand,
so used to the assumption being you're wrong. You need to apologize and not being able to say anything about it. This idea of having my own agency and being able to stand up and go, screw you, I'm not apologizing because I just said, I don't, whatever.
okay,
No,
but the thing is,
I see what you're going.
but if you want to have a healthy, safe relationship, you're going to have to understand why your partner was hurt.
Yes,
You
and
have to
I would desperately
understand
want
that,
to.
right?
Yes.
And say, I'm going to work on communicating differently around your emotional needs, or I'm going
Yeah.
to communicate differently. And I need explicit, information on how I can communicate differently. When you have a loss, when you have a stressful day, what can I say? What can I do? I think it's about understanding what the other person needs. But if you don't want to apologize, and it feels forced, I think that's maybe it's not a red flag, but it's certainly a flag,
Well, it points
right?
to a need for a conversation like that.
Right.
It's something. I don't know what it is, but okay, that's a good point.
Yeah. So
I
thank
like
you
it.
for saying that. I think that's
Well,
going to
thank
resonate
you.
about
Thank
people.
you.
Yeah, Greg.
I got to be honest, you know.
Yeah, I want
Oh
us to
yeah.
be.
And Scott, yeah, your explanation of that is exactly what I hear from the autistic side of my couples all the time, you know, and it is difficult. And so again, this is the problem, right? If someone has the authority of what is right, right, and someone has the power, you know, we have to recognize that even sorry is a biodirectional thing. It's not a unidirectional thing. It's like I determine how you need to think and feel, right? And this is about blame and fault. Is that safe? No, it is not. And I think Mona's right that I want the partner, because you love them, to want to know what does get them hurt. You know, I want you to know that for sure.
Mhm.
But is it your fault is a whole nother thing. Okay. And I always say that understanding is the most important thing. Also intentions. And for me, I would also say that those are a little bit more important than the change of the behavior, because that's where we have to start. You know, the change of behavior might be a limitation that doesn't happen. You know, at some. And so when I coach autistics in how to apologize, I often say, "Can you say you're sorry and acknowledge your role in the hurt that your partner has?" So it's not about blame or fault. It's kind of, I was part of this. You know, is it mine? Is it yours? That isn't being determined here, right? It is, because I think this is the problem, is that now I decide what is right and wrong. And again, this is going to trigger autistics in terms of demand avoidance and their drive for autonomy. Oh, you're telling me, you know, what is right and how I have to behave. Maybe your emotional issues are your problem and I didn't do anything wrong,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so we have to recognize that this is biodirectional. This
Mhm.
isn't unidirectional, you know. And as we talked about before, you may have to ask yourself, and this is just an honest question, it's not a blame question, is why are you partnered up with your partner that is so opposite of you? Because
Amen. Amen, Greg.
those are those areas that you need to work on too.
Yes.
You know, and hopefully it's bi-directional, meaning that the other partner is also recognizing, wow, my partner is really different than me, and this is an area of growth for me. So a lot of times we're identifying our own areas of growth, but we're trying to point the finger across the room, and that's when it doesn't
Ooh.
become safe, right?
100% agree. I did that throughout my marriage. That's the thing.
Sure.
When you have this awareness, and that's what has been so wonderful about neurodiverse love, because it has been so critically important to my healing journey, because I have had the opportunity to look in the mirror. And I think that's what a lot of us are afraid to do. I'm not afraid to to look in the mirror. My daughter, if she ever watches this YouTube, she used to call me a shit starter. That was like my middle name, Mona Shitstarter. And I didn't really get what she meant, but I would egg people on, and especially my ex-husband. She grew up with both of us going through these conflicts and not really resolving a lot. But I would just push, why didn't you respond the way I wanted you to? Why didn't you say that? Why aren't you emotionally more
Mm.
available? Why did you leave when we were having a heated conversation? Scott's covering his,
Why?
why, right?
That you
And
are.
and that was again not healthy, but I didn't understand how much pressure I was putting on him to be like me so that I would feel better about maybe my inadequacies and my inability to communicate effectively. One of the therapeutic models that I don't always love for neurodiverse couples, but I think is helpful, there's some tools that are helpful, and it's imagotherapy. And that's Harville Hendricks, not horrible Hendricks, Harville Hendricks, and Helen LaHunt Kelly. So what they say is we do pick our partners because they represent the things that we need to work through the most, usually from a caretaker from our childhood. It could be a parent, it could be a caretaker who we have unresolved issues with. So I 100% agree with you, Greg, that if we look at these challenges we have in our neurodiverse relationship, as opportunities for growth. But, or however, I tried to say however rather than but, if you feel yourself physically unwell, if you feel yourself mentally unwell in your relationship and you can't get healthy, then it's really time to re-examine whether this is the right relationship for you. And that's where I got. I was unhealthy physically, I was unhealthy mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and I knew it. And it wasn't my ex-husband's fault. It was because we were no longer compatible. And
It's a
we didn't have a Greg Fuqua to help us. We didn't. You weren't out there doing this, or I didn't find you in 2017. Anyway. So what
Yep.
do you guys think? I mean, this is really important stuff.
I think I was considering an apology that would be acceptable or feel okay to give would be like.
Good.
Oh,
And it's a more holistic sort of gestalt approach in that, we've I don't know if you've watched a lot of plane crash shows about
never,
okay,
never.
they investigate plane crashes but the result is always that it's more than one thing that went wrong. It's a
Mhm.
series of things, a series of small decisions, seemingly unimportant choices that lead to disaster. And then they
Okay.
decode all that. So this idea of there being blame and somebody being sorry, to me, in relationships they're complicated too. And I am always ready to accept if I did something wrong, I'm willing to fess up and work on it. I'm eager to. I want to be the most productive person, to be seen and praised for being the most, best relationship guy in my relationship. Um, but I'm not going to take the sole blame because I know that it's more complicated than that. So for me to be told you're the one who has to say sorry doesn't fly. However, I regret that things got this way. I feel bad that our communication broke down and left us both feeling hurt. That's not how I intended it to be. I don't want it to be that way in the future, and I want to work with you to make things better. To me, that feels like it's an apology.
Yep.
But
I love that.
unless I say sorry or I'm sorry I did that, I feel like I'm not going to get the forgiveness, and that I'm stuck, and that this is going to be held on my account, and that I'll be in an emotional overdraft.
Those are great
And
examples.
that is
Thank you.
phenomenal. I
Yeah.
hope those that are listening,
Can I
or
say that without getting my head bit off?
well, that's a question you have to ask your partner.
Well,
This
she'll
is
be
how
back
I
soon.
say I'm sorry because this is what feels comfortable for me.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's always bi-directional still, right? It's
Yeah.
always dynamic. And if it's not, then it's unsafe. There's an unsafe a power dynamic in the relationship. And those are what really determine the downfall of relationships more than anything. So I think you got it right. Again, I also like, I'm sorry for my part in this,
Yes.
so again, it's always more than one thing, again, I think that's more accurate. And again, the specificity and the accuracy for an autistic is very important. I love those examples, Scott. That's exactly what I would coach an autistic to say what, right? Let's think about what would sound right and yeah, you do have to check in with your partner, and your partner may say, yeah, but I also need this.
Okay.
Or, so can you also close that gap and find that bridge too a little bit, because you want to give a little bit too. Again, it's bi-directional. It's not unidirectional. It's not one way. It's not a one-way street. So absolutely.
Yeah. I think this conversation is going to be so helpful to a lot of people. I really do. And it really reinforces how we in neurodiverse relationships, no matter what our neurotype, create so many problems because we get overstimulated, we get dysregulated, we get triggered, and we go for the jugular. Just saying, right? I did it
Yep.
over and over again. And when we go for the jugular and we don't pause and we don't know how to self-soothe and we don't know how to re-regulate, we are creating so much tension in our relationship that sometimes even really good attempts at repair don't work. So, understanding all those things that you said earlier, Greg, understanding what you need to self-soothe, understanding what your partner needs, taking those pauses, and understanding that I gave you guys 4 books that have lots of great information in them, but none of them are going to work perfectly for any neurodiverse couple. But what you said, Scott, if I had heard that from my ex-husband, it would have just calmed me down. But
Especially
I
if I'd
had to
said it all
be
smooth.
with a little Barry White in the background. Um, I think that I couldn't have heard that when I was dysregulated.
Yeah.
That's what I learned. I had to pause and get re-regulated. But then when I came back, or we came back together, and I was re-regulated, if I had heard that, it probably would have made me cry, and we would have had good sex.
All right. Well, I'm going to
I'm
clip
just saying,
that. I'm going to clip that apology then and keep it on my phone so that
do
I can.
do.
In fact, I'll clip it. We'll put it on like the TikToks and the Instagrams, and then everybody can have it on their phone and be like, in the words of Scott Simpson from Neurodivergent Connections on YouTube,
Yes.
I
I
do not admit any part in it. No, I didn't say it like that.
No, you said it beautifully. I think it
Thank
needs
you.
to be clipped. So what do you guys, anything else that you guys want to say before we close out?
I just want to name a book since you were naming books.
Yeah.
I really got a lot out of Love and Asperger's Practical Strategies to Help Couples Understand Each Other and Strengthen Their Connection by Kate McNulty,
Yeah.
or maybe she says it McAnulty. I don't know. That would be fun. LCSW, she's a social worker too. Lots of examples in her book that take apart a blow up or dispute and ask from both perspectives, what just happened here? And
Yep.
it gets you in the habit of taking different perspectives from different neurotypes and getting to spot the kinds of things that do go wrong in advance. So when they do go wrong, because stuff's still going to go wrong, that you can handle it in a way that bring you closer together instead of blowing each other to other ends of the house.
Yeah, and I think Kate is autistic. I think.
It felt like it felt like it was written by one of our people. Yes.
Yeah, I think she is. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I've read her book. It's really good.
Have it at home myself. Yep.
Yeah. How about you, Greg? Any last words?
No, I think, yeah, I think this is a really important conversation. And yeah, I think we really hit on a lot of things, hopefully helpful for people. To your point, I would have couples when they were dysregulated would completely misinterpret what the other person was saying. And I would be like, whoa, right? So the filter, becomes, part of that emotional filter, and that emotional intensity can be a filter that also creates more and more problems. So creating that break, creating that calm in your nervous system and coming back is critical if you want to have successful repairs.
Yeah.
And please make sure to come back if you say you're going to come back. And if you intend to come back, make sure you say you're going to come back, because
Yeah.
if somebody bails and it's not clear whether they're going to come back, somebody can fall apart real fast.
Yeah,
Mhm.
to me, again, that's sort of a power dynamics,
Yeah.
Now I determine when and how and why, no, it's got to be, a dynamic. It's got to be something that's
It's kind of a
collective.
statement to say that I have the power to pull the plug.
Exactly. Or,
It
yeah.
doesn't feel safe, right? That
Nope.
doesn't feel safe. No.
Yep. Stonewalling. Yeah.
Yep. Did that one too. I could write a book of all the things I do wrong, right?
I'm
That's
glad we all survived all this, eh? I'm glad we all made it to this date to have this recording, and that, sorry, I know it's not Thanksgiving, it's the start of a new year, but I'm just feeling very grateful that we made it through so many hard days to be able to share with other people what they can do to make their days better.
There you go. So I hope for everybody that this episode has been helpful. And, we can always change. We can always change the way we see our partners. We can always change the way we see ourselves. It's a choice we make every day. Yeah, we can see ourselves and our partners through a negative light, or we can see ourselves and our partners through a loving light. That's my actual word for this year, for 2025. It's about love.
Nice.
I like it. I always choose a word. That's my word. All right. All right. Greg, do you want to take us out for this episode of Neurodivergent Connections?
Yeah. Wishing everybody a wonderful new year. In a 2025 that hopes bring more connection, love, and understanding to the people around you. And yeah, stay in touch.